Hello, and welcome to Outlook Video, your nationally recognized, award-winning LGBTQ TV monthly news magazine. I'm Roberta Gonzalez-Gregg. Outlook Video, in pre-pandemic COVID-19 times, was broadcast to you via the Create TV studios in San Jose. Though we are now slowly re-entering a yet another upgraded COVID-19 safety tier, we still aren't all the way clear yet, so we are continue to safely bring your broadcast to you via Zoom. We sincerely hope you, your family, friends, and loved ones are staying safe and well. When we think of history, we tend to think of major events, which we were taught to us as events from the far distant past. We often take for granted many of those events, not as historic, but now as a part of our everyday lives, such as the right to vote for women. Not often enough do we learn of the struggles and stories of those who made history, not only with this right granted to all women, but especially other historical events, which is what is now known as the LGBTQ community. Recently, at a San Jose Historic Park event, San Jose State Professor of History, Wendy Rouse, presented her findings of the queer history of women's suffrage movement. Outlook Video is pleased to welcome Professor Rouse to enlighten us further on this topic and more. Welcome, Professor Wendy Rouse.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
It's exciting to have you here because your focus is on history. Obviously, you're a professor of history, so that covers a wide range of events that have happened over numerous years. But what your focus is, and what we've found at the recent history event, was the public faces and secret lives of queer history of the women's suffrage movement. So this is really something that we haven't learned enough about. We find a lot in history about our heroes. We don't find a lot about our sheroes. So tell us a little bit about this, please.
Yes, I'm really excited. My new book comes out in May, and it's on, as you mentioned, the queer history of the women's suffrage movement. And I look at everything from suffragists who were genderqueer in their public appearance and their behavior to suffragists and their secret queer love lives. So it's a really kind of a fascinating dive into history. And the research really, it wasn't that easy because essentially what I'm doing is spending a lot of time like digging through people's diaries and their letters to try to uncover this history, because as you mentioned, we do not know a lot about women's history in particular, and especially about queer history. And this is because much of queer history has been erased.
Not only has it been erased, but that, I mean, it was literally thrown under the rug. With probably a lot of these where you might have dug up some of these diaries, but also just erased, erased from the history, so that we don't know of these, especially these sheroes, which I like to call them, and these queer women who really were quite instrumental in the movement. Is that right?
Yes, many of them were leaders of the movement. Some of them were more radical outcasts, were kind of pushed to the extremes. In part because they were so kind of standing outside the realm of what was normal for their era. But yes, some fascinating stories throughout the book.
Okay, and with that in mind, with history in mind, and as a professor of history, do you try to focus on women's history, queer history, a variety of history throughout time?
Yeah, well, traditionally, I've looked at women's history and I've focused on women and children during the early 20th century. And this book, I dive more into queer history specifically because I was fascinated by the suffrage movement and just wanted to know more about some of the relationships within the movement. And so I teach a course in the California history at San Jose State, but I also teach an LGBTQ history course.
Excellent, excellent. That's the best way to get things out there, if you'll pardon the pun, get it out, so that way we learn about our shared history. And it's great to know that to learn these things, all the time. A little bit late, but that's okay. We want to get these things known and embrace that our history and be proud of these things that these people did before us, and some of them at great personal expense.
Right. And it's hard because, so much of our history, as we mentioned, has been erased, but also it's rare to really see ourselves as queer people represented in history, and especially like youth growing up today, queer youth. It's really important to uncover this history and get those stories out there so that they can see themselves, they can read about queer ancestors and understand how
Yes.
important this was in the past, and how these people played key roles in things like the women's suffrage movement.
Yes, indeed, indeed. So I'm anxious to grab a copy of your book and read more about and delve into that. And speaking of your books, you have some other books. You have one, Her Own Hero, and this is in regards to women's self-defense. Tell us a little bit about this and how this came about.
Yeah, so my whole life I've studied martial arts and self-defense, and I never really thought of, much of the history of it, which was weird because I was a history student, I was a history major. Um, and when I was doing research for another project in an old newspaper, I came across an image of a woman dressed in the time clothing of the time period, and she's fighting back. She's using self-defense against an attacker. And it surprised me because I did not know there was this long history of women studying self-defense. So that's what the book's about. It's about the origins of the women's self-defense movement right around the time of the suffrage movement, honestly. So that early 20th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, as you said, she was dressed in the time of the era. And what era was that? The beginning of the 20th century,
Yeah, the beginning of the
you
20th
say?
century. So the early 1900s. And it's just, I
Oh,
had no idea. I thought the women's self-defense was something of the 1960s and 70s, but it turned out there was an early self-defense movement in the US at the turn of this 20th century.
okay. And it's I think that's something else that might have been, kind of thrown under the rug because, as you say, most of us think of it happening in the 60s, and onward, um, with a variety of martial arts, particularly which embraced men and women. But I think that's something that we need to know as well, is that this history is important. And I think especially now because so many things like the voting rights are being scrutinized, um, for women and for women and people of color. And do you think that might be also be touching a little bit on the self-defense that women are feeling, that's something that they maybe shouldn't be doing, or just the opposite? Has that reaching another peak?
Yeah, I think what we find is that there are parallels between the women's
Mm,
self-defense movement and women's rights movement. So usually when we see a resurgence of interest in women's rights, we also see a resurgence of interest in self-defense, because women's self-defense is almost a different form of empowerment, right? There's the political empowerment of voting, and then there's the physical empowerment that comes along with self-defense. So I think we see that in parallel at the same times through various points in history.
that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you for so much. I wanted to have our viewers hear that as well. Empowerment. Empowerment. Yes, indeed. Empowerment really has no gender. Empowerment, well, it shouldn't, right?
Right.
um, yes, and it should be, one of those things that's just an equal, an equality right around all in every aspect of our lives. But unfortunately, we don't find it that way. So books such as yours in these writings are helping people to re-understand that. And as you said, youth in particular, who are very vulnerable right now and need to see those affirmations in the world. So we thank you for bringing these forwards. And what do you have for the future besides these books? What
Ooh,
else
I'm
do you have? Do
working.
you have anything else coming up?
I'm not sure right now. I'm working on several projects, writing curriculum for K-12 students on queer history and on women's history, and working on some other research projects that hopefully become books in the future.
Terrific. Wonderful. And that you start from kindergarten?
Yeah, it's mostly 4th through 12th grade with the Fair
Oh,
Education
okay.
Act. Yeah, the Fair Education Act in California. This is about LGBT.
Wonderful. That's also really very affirmative to know that we have such an act and that you are following through with that by teaching it. Yes, indeed. We need to know these things, and relearn some of that history and remember some of these heroes that who came before us. Wendy, thank you so very much for joining us, for sharing your story. We look forward to reading these stories, and our viewers pick up a book and check it out, and get to learn some of these sheroes for yourself. So thank you so much for being there, also for your recent History Park event, which brought this all to our attention. That was fantastic. That did the park itself and facilities, did they come to you? How did that come about, by the way?
Yes, it was a kind of a joint project with History San Jose and with Queer Silicon Valley.
Excellent. Really, very well to know. Thank you. So we've had those two entities are working side by side and in balance with each other. Thank you indeed. Well, we wish you all the best, and we look forward to reading these stories and learning more about history. Thank you. I like to say herstory.
Yes, thank
well,
you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Wendy. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Matt Alber, and you're watching Outlook Video.
Welcome to Outlook Video. I'm Gabrielle Antolovich with the Billy DeFrank LGBTQ+ Community Center. And we only just recently heard that Texas is attacking young trans children. And we have Anna Heinkel, who is an attorney, to talk about what the heck happened.
Hello, hi. So what happened was the Attorney General for Texas concocted an opinion that stated that giving gender-affirming care to a minor, anyone under the age of majority, or even under the age of 21, is considered child abuse.
But that's not even a law, that's an opinion.
It's an opinion. Then with the opinion, the governor did a directive, which is sort of like an executive order, directing all the mandatory reporters that they have to now view transgender affirming care as being an abused child, evidence of an abused child, and because they're mandatory reporters, the teachers, doctors, school administrators, coaches, all these folks that are obligate reporters that can be criminally prosecuted if they don't report, now have to basically report all trans kids that they're aware of. And keep in mind, those who are pushing for this agenda want to ultimately overturn same-sex marriage and reinstate sodomy laws.
So are you saying this is a carefully crafted piece of propaganda to sort of chip away at a number of different things that they have been wanting to chip away at?
Yes, this is where Roe v. Wade's being challenged with the Mississippi abortion case, where it's basically could reduce Roe v. Wade to just a whimper. And what I mean by that is, and even Justice Scalia thought Roe v. Wade shouldn't be completely gotten rid of. He just said it should be, quote, door jam by door jam. The mansion of Roe v. Wade should be dismantled, but never completely destroyed. And the reason for that is they want to have it where states can decide whether or not they want to allow abortion. So it's going back to a states' right argument, or, basically who won the Civil War now changes.
So are you saying that it probably is easier to, do this child protection that rather than an outright attack on transgender people, adults, that, we want to protect the children from being abused.
Okay.
And that is good propaganda. Is that what you're also saying?
Let me take off my lawyer hat and put on my trans hat. I'm a male to female transgender person. And what it's designed to do is inch by inch push trans people out of the public public arena where you can't exist anywhere. So for example, in Texas, imagine this: if you're a 15-year-old male to female transitioning child, young adult, and you've been taking your hormone blockers for years, you're getting ready to start actually having your hormone of choice be estrogen. So you're blocking your testosterone now, and then you're looking forward to when you turn 18 to start estrogen, and go on your merry way. And the whole point of it is to avoid having the ravages of the wrong kind of puberty destroying your body. So in my particular case, when I hit puberty, it was just horrifying to me because my body all of a sudden started masculinizing, and it just really depressed the heck out of me. I was certain what I was inside, although because of my generation wasn't cool to be out, I went through all this alone. Now, though, you have children who could even have supporting, loving parents, even supporting, loving teachers and classmates and all that. That all gets uprooted. And now basically in order to continue their care, they're going to have to leave the state of Texas. So imagine being the child where your parents are situated in Texas, they're settled in, they own a house, they have jobs. And all of a sudden, because of they have to all uproot and move to another state. That's a lot of pressure to put on a child. And my hunch is that this is going to provoke an increase in suicide. It's already tough enough for these kids if they're facing this. And there's been an overblowing of the effects of the hormone blockers that they're saying some people have cited some sketchy studies that said, oh, well, it can affect your ability to have children later. Well, that's not really true. This, according to the American Medical Association, this is perfectly safe to do it with minors and delay their puberty. And the whole point is get them to the age of majority where they can then make their own informed decision and then take the hormone that they want, and they'll have puberty all at once, which is a lot of fun. So when I transitioned, having been on testosterone for 41 years and went on to estrogen, that was my second puberty. And boy, is that fun being a 41-year-old lawyer in puberty. So wow. It's dreadful what they're doing. And then if you get taken off the hormone blocker, you go through puberty again, but the wrong puberty. So that's the child abuse.
That's the real child abuse. Yeah.
Yes. So, but they want to get this probably up to the Supreme Court. They're looking for a challenge, and they want to use it to attack the right of that you have a fundamental right to medical privacy.
And so it seems to me this seems to be an even greater hidden agenda.
It's political, in my opinion, and I'll invite you to take a look at how trans people, in particular, and LGBTQIA plus people are treated in Russia. And it's kind of interesting because Russia is on everyone's lips with Ukraine. But Russia is really where they minted this strategy of othering people, which is the populist agenda, as a way of
othering people.
Yeah, othering is where, like, for example, with Nazi Germany, they othered Jews. And so you say there's a group of people, the other, and they're the ones destroying our society, and we need to get rid of them. Putin's been doing this in his country, suppressing the LGBT community, where you can't publicly display like your flags or advocate for being queer. You can be queer, you just can't talk about it or have public affection, acts of affection, things like that. You have to keep it on the DL, which basically is pushing you out of the public sphere, and it makes you feel horrible because now you're like, why can't I be me when everybody else gets to be me? And it has a psychological effect of just crushing people. And then it
Yeah.
gets other people to turn against them. So now this in tandem with bathroom bills, you can't compete on school teams with your identified gender. You have to go with your birth sex, despite hormone blocking, things like that, where that puts you at a disadvantage. It's a big mess, and it's all for the purpose of having an other, because that's how you rally the people together. That's how you get the votes, is you make this a big deal and you talk about it all the time, and it takes people's minds off of the real things that government should be doing, like fixing roads and infrastructure, and what about high-speed rail and better internet and internet for
Climate
people in the
change.
country.
Yeah.
So this is this game they play, and it's a political device in order to maintain power.
But why do you think, say, the governor of Texas, as an example, thinks he can get away with being awful about trans kids or transgender people? What is it that lets him get away with that?
Because it's popular with his base. They like it. It shows him as being tough on trans, as if there's like this problem with being transgender, and he's showing that he has the ability to sidestep democracy. You know, in other words, why didn't he have the legislature draft a bill and present it to him? He just did a end run on them and made this edict. And that's a very anti-democratic process. But the populist base that he appeals to, who is fully engaged in othering trans people and queer people in general, they eat this stuff up.
Well, what's interesting to me is that this is happening in the wake of Trans Day of Visibility in March. So I'm seeing this as a opportunity to be a voice for transgender folks. So what do you feel as a trans woman, what would be a great thing to do for Trans Day of Visibility that would, be like a pushback against people like the governor of Texas and the other legislators that are anti-trans? What can we do?
I think it's pretty simple. For me, and for a lot of trans people I've talked to, every day is Halloween. Halloween's the one day you dress up as something else, but every day, you're wearing the clothes you're not supposed to be wearing, the costume. The problem with Transgender Day of Visibility is it impliedly means there's 364 days of transgender invisibility. And the thing to focus on that day is, let's make the whole year where there's visibility, and we need positive press. We need to show examples of success stories of people accomplishing things just like other people accomplish things. So for the example, the person who founded Sirius XM, transgender person, the Wachowski sisters who did The Matrix, transgender, who are these people who have done things of merit, and to show that we're not just all a bunch of suicidal, dysfunctional people that need big daddy government to come in and straighten us out with their belt. So that's what I think should happen on Transgender Day of Visibility, is to promote, to acknowledge the people who've made it, who've gotten past the troubles, to give hope, and then to then focus on those who need hope and need help, and then to point out that every day needs this kind of thought, a daily meditation on, what can I do to help trans people?
That sounds great. And you're an example of that. Thank you so much. You're an attorney. You're a wonderful transgender woman. You are alive and you are a fighter. And thank you for the interview. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hopefully it was useful. Thank you. So are we done?
We love to get mail from you. Email us at comments@outlookvideo.org.
To contact us by phone, call 408-293-3040, extension 205.
Visit our website at outlookvideo.org.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/outlookvideo.
And connect with us at facebook.com/outlookvideo.
Hi everybody, this is John Angel with Outlook Video. I'm in the middle of Palm Canyon Drive with Kim Lawson behind the camera, and we are waiting for the beginning of the 2021 Pride Parade here in Palm Springs. Last year it was canceled due to the COVID epidemic, but this year everybody is excited and there are tons of people waiting for the beginning of the parade.
One up, two. Step.